Hi, my name is Kelly Patrick, and I'm exploring Chapter 6, Forming and Building Sculptures. This is ARU 330/430 Studio Thinking, and it's hosted by Dr. Spears. First, I'm exploring clay, and here's just a short list of some of the materials I'm working with. I start by solid modeling because oftentimes kids just want to get into it and build structures and they're not really worried about hollowing anything out. So building small figurines is a good way to explore that. So I just started making some in different positions and seeing what I could do with them, putting them all together in a group. And I didn't really go in depth on facial features and whatnot. I kind of kept them vague so that later I can paint things onto them. But that's just some basic form building using solid figures. Next, I went into pinch pots and I'm wearing gloves just as a way to keep my hands from drying out so much. But I start by making a simple pinch pot and then I go back and attach two pinch pots to make a hollow form and then I shaped it into a pear. So then you can explore with coil building. So I rolled out some coils and I rolled them up and smoothed them and then I used some molds to make little coasters or trays. Um, you can also roll up coils and start building vessels upwards, like I'm doing here. And then I just went back with a normal metal rib and I carved out the edges kind of so that they would be more sharp. And I went for a rectangle shape. And then I went back and I added a handle just to fit with the geometric shape that I was going for. You can also explore slab building. So you just use a rolling pin and roll out a slab. And then I used some shapes just to carve out tiles. And then I had a rubber little texture plate that I just pressed into it and it gave these pretty flower inlays. And then I just cut a little hole so that later after I glaze it, I can turn this into a wall hanging or something. You could even go further with this and make a whole series of these and just make a big, extravagant, beautiful wall hanging out of multiple little tiles like that. So with the extra slab, I just went back and pressed in more of the texture and then I cut out my own shape, which you can also do with leftover clay. Here's another example of slab building where I just put it over a mold and then I went and pressed texture back into it for a cup like this. So it's similar to the coil building, but it's just a different approach. It's all up to preference. So I like to explore with different surface color and finish. So here I took some of my pears that I made and I Mod Podged them over just to seal them. And then I went back and mixed some acrylic paint and I painted over them to give them a more realistic look rather than just a one-tone shiny glaze. Sometimes I prefer this. So here I went in with some watercolor, and for these ones I don't seal them with Mod Podge because I find that um, the bisque-fired clay piece kind of just absorbs the watercolor nicely, so I don't feel it's necessary to Mod Podge them. You can push this further by then doing it onto larger sculptures. This was one of my second times painting onto a ceramic piece like this. So I was kind of just experimenting and seeing what colors I could get. This was actually glazed, but I didn't like the glaze, so I ended up just painting over it. So the lips are actually watercolor and then the skin is all acrylic paint. So as I reflect upon my creation, specifically the pears, I'm reminded of Annette Shifton's Still Life series. Her project, Looking at Nature, investigates the traditions of still life in light of globalization and cross-cultural influences. She's not admiring nature in a traditional way. She's using her still lifes to tell a story of art, history, and global politics. Next, I'm exploring found objects, and here's just a list of what I used for this. So first, I got to um, find a large object that I thrifted, this little glass vase, and add skin onto a solid form. So I could have went anywhere with this, but I decided to explore a little more using polymer clay to kind of wrap into the other clay explorations. So I rolled these up into different coil forms and then kind of flattened them out onto the vase. And I did this with all different colors all around the whole vase. It kind of isn't aesthetically pleasing, but I think that kids would really enjoy doing something like this. And you could even go back after you bake it in the oven and like draw designs onto the colors. And then what I did at the end was I Mod Podged everything just for a shiny finish. So next, I'm creating a standing structure using just, these are plastic spoons that have a shiny gold-like finish and then just some paint brushes. And I created this standing figurine of just a man or a woman or a paintbrush, just but I wanted to really use these tools because paintbrushes and spoons are something I use like in my everyday life. So I later went back and added on this fabric that I found as just like a little shirt to complete the piece. I attached these using hot glue. So as you can see in the left, I used some twine to hold everything in place while everything kind of stiffened up. And then I later was able to remove it and it stood just fine. So I went into further explorations with the spoons and just hot glue and just different ways of attaching and assembling them. And with all of these littler assemblages, I made this larger one. You can't really tell, but it stands kind of tall and it kind of just feels like spoons falling out of the sky. So I like it, and I think that if I could even go back and continue adding spoons, I ran out of spoons, but I mean, imagine if this was up to the ceiling. You could just keep going so high. So then I was transforming a book. So I don't really like cutting up books, but I found this one on Steve Jobs and I liked the way he was sitting. I thought it would make for a good composition. So I cut it out and then I cut cardboard accordingly to fit up. And then I attached something to the back to help stabilize and stand it. And then I just kind of arranged them how I would want them. And then I went back with just hot glue and put them in the book. Next, I'm exploring wire, mesh, and screen foil, and here are the materials. So I started by just thinking about like simple line drawings and drawing in space, just like contour drawings. So I decided to make binoculars for this, and I thought it was kind of cool because it wasn't too difficult. It was just simple shapes, making circles out of the wires and then attaching them to straight pieces of wire. So it wasn't a hard assemblage, and you're really just focusing on contour lines rather than things like shading and stuff like that. So it gives you a different perspective on drawing. So my work thus far with wire is inspired by artist Lois Schlar's wire and found object installations. She said, working directly on the wall, I explore the formal qualities of line, space, and movement. Next, I'm making a suspended wire construction. So I just started by making basic shapes, kind of rough sketching it out with the wire and just attaching it. And this reminded me of a mobile that hangs above like babies' cribs, but it felt really industrial looking. So I went back and I added some fake flowers. The pictures don't really do it justice, but it looks kind of like an earthy little chandelier. Next, I explored screen forms and I didn't have any mesh, so I just used some craft metal chicken wire that I found. And I didn't want to mess up the styrofoam head because I figured I could use it for something later. So I just used my head to get a basic shape. And then I referred back to the styrofoam. At this point, if you wanted to, you could go in with paper mache or plaster wrap and kind of wrap this form and go about it that way. But I decided to take it and combine it with materials like aluminum foil. So I went again and I used my face and I just pressed the foil into it to get this form. And then I roughly attached it, and this felt a little boring. So I went back again and I used the styrofoam head to get some of that shape, and I attached additional heads onto this body. It kind of reminds me of when the angel and devil are on each of your shoulders, so I thought it was more of an interesting composition than before. So next is the foil forms, and this kind of gave me trouble because they were not sturdy at all, and aluminum foil crumbles very easily if it's not solid. So I ended up just making this solid figurine that really isn't anything special. This was really eye-opening for me because I'm so used to working with clay and then not having that flexibility or maybe too much flexibility with this was a little difficult to navigate, and I was having trouble attaching some of the forms. So next I'm exploring media with construction and other materials. So here's just a list of some of the materials I used. So again, I went back to the styrofoam head and I had some leftover plaster wrap, and I decided to just make a mold and then attach some spoons over the eyes. One is silver and one is gold, and then I mounted this onto a piece of painted cardboard. And then my next exploration was designing an article of clothing. So I got a bunch of used grocery bags and I braid it and weave them together into this long rope-like form. And then I went back and made this blouse, and it reminds me of a corset top, which are really in style right now. So I'm actually proud of this, and I hope that I can explore it more in the future. Next, I created something 2D based on my 3D work, so I decided to make an identity collage because I feel like all the things that I made thus far kind of represent my identity or reflect a part of me. So this just kind of pushes that further. So I included art, flowers, a dining room table to represent family, some cats, and the beach. So I mounted this to this frame that I painted gold. And then I was experimenting with installation. So I took my pieces and I put them together based on how they related and what type of elements bring them together. So you can see some are shiny, some are faces. These are all ceramic pieces. And so I thought maybe those could be a separate, and all of these sculptures incorporate spoons, so I was just seeing how the different sculptures related to each other and juxtaposed one another. But unfortunately, I'm out of time, so I don't want to keep babbling on. But I hope that one day you can explore some of these materials within your classroom. And if you guys have any questions for me, please don't hesitate to reach out and I can explain further about my processes throughout this chapter of sculpture and exploration. Thank you so much, and bye.